Welcome into a new edition, the Going Deep Buffalo podcast. I'm your host, as always, Kevin Massare, here with Kevin Siracuse to talk about not only a 7-2 Bills team, got a big Colts game coming up, AFC game. Believe it or not, Josh Allen has never beaten the Colts in the regular season. So one of a few teams that he has not yet beaten in the regular season, obviously did in the playoffs. So we're going to have one of my favorite Colts guests on to discuss what's going on in the roster with Richardson, everything that's going on inside of Indianapolis. I love having Cody Felger on, one of my favorite guys. So always fun when we play the Colts. Also, we had the trade deadline, not pretty active, but not a ton going on. The Bills have already made their splash, as we all know, for Amari Cooper, who's getting through that wrist injury now. Few light end moves, got a couple of defensive tackles in Jordan Phillips and Quentin Jefferson, some old friends of the Buffalo Bills in back on the roster. Jordan Phillips had some great comments about wanting to be wanted. He's so definitely some really cool stuff out of Jordan Phillips today. He's always a good soundbite. And Quentin Jefferson, who went off and had a solid career after, really had that 2-year, $11 million deal in Buffalo. It was a questionable deal, wasn't always up to the fruition of how well he should have played for that money. But he's back for veteran minimum and is going to be a solid fourth defensive tackle on this Bills roster. So solid addition for not having to give up much. As always, though, the show is brought to you by the Summit Center for some of the best autism care in Western New York.
And tonight's show is also brought to you by Dave Dengler and the Larson-Timko Funeral Home in Fredonia. Larson-Timko Funeral Home offering 100% fully guaranteed price and pre-arranged funeral plans with live streaming available. You can give them a call at 716-679-9000 or visit their website at larsontimkofuneralhome.com.
As always, thanks to our show sponsors, but some action. So we had some action, Kevin. Let's immediately, real quickly, Jordan Phillips, always been here, seems to always find his way back. Feels like Shaq Lawson's not far away at this point once we get back the old band. But the Bills did have some defensive tackle injuries. Obviously, Carter a few weeks ago, now on IR, should be back after the bye. So it isn't, 2 more weeks. So it's not a crazy situation. So the Bills probably felt like with Carter coming back, they didn't know how much assets they could allocate, especially wanting those cheap third round, day 3 picks next year. They don't know really the situation of going for a Joseph Sebastian Day. Like the problem here that I'm having is, do these moves move the needle at all? Quentin Jefferson, maybe a little bit more than Jordan Phillips. Let's hear what are your opinions? The Bills did go out and get 2 defensive tackles. You'd have to imagine with the release of Mike Edwards. We talked about Mike Edwards on the show multiple times throughout the year. It just got straight up beat out by DeMar Hamlin. That's all it comes down to. Then doesn't play any special teams himself. And it led to a situation where he asked for his release, went to sign in Tennessee, which is interesting. You'd have to imagine, you can induce that the Bills were probably discussing a trade with the Tennessee Titans. It's not really that crazy to assume that, for Sebastian Joseph Day, that they could have gone out and made that trade. But one thing to remember before you get into it, if they took on Joseph Day, they would have had to lose a compensation pick because of his free agency status. He would have counted against the comp pick formula, thus scratching out a 5th round pick just for acquiring him, even if you got him for free. So that's the first and foremost on top of whatever the Titans would have wanted. So at that point, the Bills may have known they already would have had to use a 5th right there. And I'm assuming they probably wanted a late round draft choice as well. And the Bills said, that's just a little bit too much with Carter coming back. We don't know how much better than Quentin Jefferson, maybe, or Jordan Phillips. And I had to imagine that went into their decision. But ultimately, they probably couldn't get a deal done with Mike Edwards either. They would have probably liked to do that 1-for-1, more than likely. But the Bills were able to get 2 defensive tackles for free. So at least on the front end, it's really good business by Brandon Beane, because no assets allocated. At least we can start there and knowing that they're going to go in with a full complement of 10 picks next year as well.
I mean, this is kind of a joke, but there is a little bit of truth to it. I feel like the Bills, I wish they could have just traded Mike Edwards for, Sebastian Joseph Day. Sorry, I was going to say Jordan Phillips. So I was like, wait a sec. No, he didn't come from Tennessee. But if they could have gotten Sebastian Joseph Day, then just give them Mike Edwards. It would have been an even 1-for-1. But obviously, there's a lot more that goes into it. But when you look at it now and you see the framework, I was a big fan of Joseph Day. But I think to answer your question, I think that the Bills did what they had to do to solidify their defensive line. Does it move the needle? Not really, maybe a smidge, but I think that they're banking on Dwayne Carter making a comeback. I think that they're hoping that Dwan Smoot, pardon me, can come back. And essentially, these guys are placeholders to kind of bolster up that defensive line in the meantime. And then you would like to think that it's a good problem to have once everyone is healthy for that stretch run going into January.
Yeah, I mean, look, they're getting a plethora of players back here shortly. Most notably, the one that keeps getting asked about soon is Matt Milano. Terrell Bernard was answered the question. He can't wait to play next to him. So Matt Milano is probably starting close to that window, getting close to thinking about opening that window. So there's a linebacker move right there. Now you have 7 linebackers. That's more than the Bills ever carry. There's no room for a linebacker. Now, when you look at the defensive line situation, they were already heavy at defensive end. That was my issue. Obviously, they lost Smoot, so that could have played a role into the situation. But already having 60 ends on the roster, it's tough to go out and acquire another one. And they're hoping Smoot is back by the end of the season, probably similar to Daquan Jones last year. You're probably hoping to get him back at some point in one of those AFC East divisional games at the end of the season. So it's tough with the roster numbers to make a move there. And then obviously with Carter already coming back in 2 weeks, they felt the necessary need to not ship a draft choice to select another defensive tackle. So I think that that's really where the decision lied. And and then obviously the Bills cap situation on top of it. I can't imagine them being too interested in making a monster move. But as you look through the roster, you're pretty deep. You're going to probably carry Phillips as a reserve defensive tackle once Carter's back. I would imagine Phillips then becomes an inactive on game day. But you're going to carry Carter, and you're going to carry Quentin Jefferson as a player you're going to utilize throughout this. You're going to be pretty heavy at defensive tackle. So we'll see what happens in that situation. In 2 weeks, you're going to need probably one of those two cut. I can't imagine that they're going to now, when Carter comes back, that they're going to keep 6 defensive tackles. They don't do that. They keep 4 usually. So they're already going to be heavy. They're going to probably reduce Smoot. So they might be 5 and 5, but I can't see them keeping Phillips for more than a few weeks. But bringing him in, he knows the system. And the last thing, Kevin, both of these players know with Sean McDermott defense, one of the biggest challenges with defensive players, depending on the position, maybe minus corner where you can make it limited, but defensive line calls, you can't just come in and play immediately and be effective. So I think that there is a little bit of continuity that you have to look for, when you're out there searching. And I think that ultimately Phillips himself and Quentin Jefferson, they were looking for pass rush productivity. Everybody thought they were looking for a run stopper. It did not seem to be the case with what the Bills may have been interested in, which may have been getting after the quarterback first and finding guys who have generally had pretty decent pressure rates, rather than elite run stoppers. The Bills feel comfortable with their top 5 rated DVOA run defense. It comes through in pivotal situations all the time. The Bills feel pretty confident in their ability to stop the run, especially when you have Matt Milano coming back to help you on the back end in coverage. It's only going to help your D-line, and Matt Milano hopefully being, returning for one of those games against the Rams or the Lions in there, maybe even sooner at the 49ers. We'll have to see. But it's going to be a good stretch one with this roster. And right now, after the Jordan Poyer hit, all you're really missing is Keon Coleman. You're going to get Christian Benford back. It looked like he had a little operation done on his wrist based on the bandage situation that went on there. So it may have been why he missed the game last week. But they're going to be fairly healthy. They're going to bring it into middle of November soon with a fully healthy, active roster. And you would have to imagine Coleman probably avoided the worst of it. But with Carter and Milano coming back soon and Smoot at the end of the year, you're in a situation to where you're bringing in the roster that you wanted to bring in. You bolstered up a little bit with Cooper and with Quentin Jefferson, and to a lesser extent, Phillips. How are you feeling with the roster construction as you enter really the second half of the year?
Well, let's break it into 3 different positions here, because I was a big proponent of these positions right here before the deadline. Defensive line, whether that was edge or defensive tackle, wide receiver, and then safety. Because I think that the Bills' moves or lack thereof needs to be discussed here. And we have about 20 minutes before our guest comes on. So let's talk about each position and how it relates to the injuries right now, because I think overall the Bills are in good shape, but I feel like they left some meat on the bone. So let's start with defensive line, because I thought that Zadarius Smith would have been perfect. I think you brought it up a couple of weeks ago because his base salary, as we are entering week 10, it was less than $1 million, right?
Yep. After you acquired him. Yes, correct.
So after you acquired Zadarius Smith, it would have been less than $1 million. And that is a proven pass rusher who can get after the quarterback. Because what's been the biggest thing that's holding the Bills back in the playoffs? It's they can't get pressure on the quarterback, specifically Patrick Mahomes. That and the run defense. Maybe not as much. I think getting pressure in general is a bigger problem. But look what happened in the 2022 playoffs against Cincinnati when they put up 172 rushing yards on the Bills. So that's why I wanted to bolster up this defensive line. And I thought that if they want to do it from a pass rush perspective, Zadarius Smith would have been perfect. And this guy has had double-digit sacks multiple seasons with different teams as well. And ultimately, we woke up to the news yesterday that Detroit pulled the trigger on that. I think that's a great move for the Lions because they miss on Aiden Hutchinson. He's done for the year, and now they just substitute him with Zadarius Smith. So Detroit is going to be a force to be reckoned with for the rest of the year. But go ahead if you want to say something about that.
No, I'm good. Go ahead.
So then I was like, okay, let's go to plan B here. And I didn't really have that much of a plan B for edge rusher for the Bills because I tweeted some things yesterday. I tweeted out some trade targets, and people responded with Jadeveon Clowney or I can never pronounce his name, a large with the Giants.
Azeez Ojulari.
Yeah, thank you. Azeez Ojulari. So I was thinking that maybe the Bills should try to pull the trigger on one of those players, but I didn't really think that Clowney fit in with the DNA here that the Bills are trying to organize. And it just didn't seem like he was a cultural fit. And that's a two-year deal on Clowney. So next year his cap hit is $9 million. They could probably rework it this year, and it probably could have been tradable. But overall, I just didn't think that Clowney was a fit. So then I was like, okay, if defensive end isn't really that feasible based on the needs and the contracts and just how everything plays out, let's go to defensive tackle. And that's why I'm going to go back to Sebastian Joseph Day, because the reason that I was trying to push the envelope on that is because he's on a 1-year, $4 million contract, and his base salary is just $1.375 million. He's been productive this year with the Titans, and he played next to Von Miller on the Rams defensive line in 2021, while also sharing the same defense with Taylor Rapp. And he has experience at defensive tackle and defensive end. So I thought that could have been a direct replacement for Juwan Smoot. So that's why I was like, if you have to shed a late day 3 pick, then do it, because that could be a very, very nice addition. But ultimately, they didn't do it. So I guess just to punctuate this thought here, Jordan Phillips, nice player, knows the system. You know he's going to give it his all. He relates to the fans very well. Quentin Jefferson, I'd say the same thing about him. I just don't know if it's enough to get over that hump in the playoffs. But I think that, as we mentioned already, the Bills are banking on the health of these players. They're banking on a bunch of these guys to come back healthy. And then you would like to think that once you get Dwayne Carter, hopefully Juwan Smoot back, then you have to make a decision between Phillips and Jefferson. And then at that point, it's like, well, maybe all 4 of these guys can be playing at such a high level that it's such a hard decision to figure out who's actually going to get a game day roster.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you have a lot to break down when it comes to, what trades could have been made. The fact that the Bills still haven't really done a ton with the Giants is interesting. Like, I thought that there could have been a play there. The team's bad. They're not around in the wild card race in the NFC. You have 2 teams above you already in your own division. But obviously, Brian Daboll and obviously Shane must have felt like they're kind of on the chopping block. They need to win games. They can't really trade their players, even rentals, for anything that's not going to help them. If it's in the future, it needs to be a solid draft choice. They want those players. They ultimately may not be around to see those draft choices. Like, at most, Daboll's got 1 more year. So unless the draft choice is high enough to where that can produce next year for him, getting a 6th-round draft choice is just not going to do it for him. And I can kind of see that perspective when you look around the league and these teams don't want to sell. You know why? Because then you're gone. So you're not going to be around to see draft choices. It's not like baseball all the time with the rentals, and teams get a little bit more leeway in that sport. But in football, like, look, you could be gone mid-season, let alone next year. So you want to keep the best roster you can to win enough at the end of the year to prove that, the team's in the right direction. So I definitely think that there's room for that discussion on why somebody wouldn't have made a move. You kind of saw it in Tennessee. You definitely saw it in New York with Ojulari. Look, Ojulari makes a lot of sense to have been moved. He can help a playoff roster right now. No idea on a rental status why you wouldn't trade him. They probably going to hold out and say they wanted a comp pick. I mean, I think they want the player this year. That's more the answer to that situation. But obviously with 5 pass rushers, Solomon and Von Miller behind your starters, and obviously Casey Tuel for special teams, run defense, a couple other things, they felt like they had all the 3 things that they were looking for. They had a pass rush specialist, and Von Miller also played well against the run. You also had Smoot hopefully coming back at some point, and you have Tuhill who does a little bit of everything, and then a young pass rusher in Solomon. And I could see why behind the 2 starters, why you may not make a move for a pass rusher. And then with Smoot going out, that was the one that was going to be like, well, maybe that could fuel a pass rusher trade. But ultimately, 5 roster spots already allocated, and you're hoping for Smoot back at the end of the year. I just don't think that they're gonna make that thing happen. And defensive line, I think that they're pretty comfortable with their top 3 defensive tackles or starters. And then behind that, I think it was par for the course, which 4th that they rolled out for 2 more weeks before Carter comes back. I just don't think they wanted to use an asset there with linebacker coming back, corner being healthy again, and being in pretty good shape. It just roster spot wise, it just didn't make a lot of sense. The last thing I'll say about this is receiver room. I think that there is a good situation to say that, like, if at all they didn't feel Samuel or Keon Coleman could produce soon, they would have had to have found another receiver. And I think that the news of not getting even a mid-tier guy, a Slayton, even a flyer guy like Hyatt or something like that is a good sign to the fact that the Bills probably feel comfortable that the receivers are going to be definitely full strength after the bye, and probably hoping for Kansas City where there's not going to be any limitations. So they like Virgil a lot, running in jet screens, jet motions, speed and sprint. So they're definitely getting their motion out of that. But ultimately, I don't think that there was a move to be made to use a roster spot on. Don't have an exact update to the Coleman injury. It does look like some type of sprain based on the fact that he got additional testing, and x-ray is pretty clear usually. They're definitely looking at some type of muscle or ligament inside the wrist somewhere, maybe in the thumb region, because there's really no reason for additional imaging. And x-ray is pretty clear. It's pretty clear. You're looking at bone, and it's definitely going to be clear. They wanted another test, a different type of test. So by all accounts, it has to be something sprain related. And if it was severe and you needed surgery, he'd probably be done for 4 to 6 weeks as well. But it's looking like he's going to avoid all that. And, McDermott would usually rule him out, hasn't done so yet. I think that he's definitely out this week, but I think that there's a realistic chance for the Chiefs game and definitely for the 49ers game. So that's probably where we lead with the roster development. And the O-line's been healthy for years now. So knock on wood, they haven't had to do anything there. Going out and trading for an offensive lineman to not play would have been just a little bit strange. The running back room's great. There's really nothing to do there. Ultimately, Brandon Beane said this roster is good. It's getting healthier. And in 2 weeks, we hope to be full strength or close to it, minus Smoot, and based on when Milano's back in the lineup. So there's not a ton to break down. And obviously the tight end room, they obviously feel good there too. So Kevin, I think that's ultimately what the roster development was, the decision there. Really only Lattimore, I think the Bills weren't going to go out and get a corner this year. Would have loved to have Lattimore. He's a really good corner, definitely for the future more than even this year. But other than that, there just wasn't a move to be made. And the Bills feel pretty comfortable at safety. And if they don't, they have Cole Bishop right there and going to take the job at some point. But I don't think they wanted to infiltrate the safety room with another player that may not play behind those top 3.
Let me go back to Keon Coleman because I want to talk about the safety position. So according to Mandy Glab, she said Sean McDermott says Keon Coleman will not practice today. They're taking him one day at a time. McDermott said it could be, quote, more than just this week, but testing is still ongoing. So pretty much what you just said. But I thought overall that was pretty encouraging because he kind of said one day at a time. It could be a week or two. He didn't really have a timetable. So I felt like it was at least encouraging that he hadn't been ruled out yet. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're going to get some more imaging done and some more tests that show that maybe he should sit for the next couple of weeks. And as you were saying, he comes back for San Francisco following the bye. But the fact that he hasn't been ruled out yet, I think that is probably the best that we could have hoped for today. So that being said, the other reason why I think it's encouraging is because they didn't make a move. I mean, they could have if they knew the severity of that injury, and
Sure.
if they knew, I think you mentioned Curtis Samuel too, another dud of a performance on Sunday. I didn't see what his final target share was or what his snap count was, but I'm pretty sure Mac Hollins outsnapped him, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have it in front of me either, but that sounds right.
Maybe even Virgil.
Yeah, I mean, I question the signing from day one. I just don't think he's a very good football player at this stage. I mean, whatever quarterbacks he has, whatever injuries it's always an excuse with Curtis Samuel, dating for many, many years. At some point, he's just a 400-yard receiver who's not even doing that right now. So ultimately,
he's not even getting like 40 yards.
No. So ultimately, he's probably going to blame it on his injury that he's had all season, this turf toe injury that we keep hearing about. But at some point, he's got to produce. So, I mean, he played 17 snaps this week. So,
but either way, if the Bills thought that it was worse between Coleman's injury and Samuel's production, they probably would have went out and made a move. Someone that I was kind of high on. Now I realize that this is a guy who could probably be like a Quentin Jefferson and just wait for him to get released. But KJ Osborne, I thought that he could be perfect. Now, going back to the offseason during free agency, he was on my wish list just because I figured he could fit that Joe Brady offense where he's versatile. He can get yards after the catch. He can create that separation. And I figured that the Patriots just had a logjam at wide receiver. He's on a 1-year deal. Send him back to Buffalo where he went to college. Adam Thielen was also on my list. I know that was a little bit more extensive just because of his contract situation, but I was curious to hear your thoughts about if the Bills could have taken a swing on Adam Thielen.
I don't think they want, no, not at the slot. They already have, I think, too many players between Kincaid and obviously Shakir, and then you're trying to find a role for Samuel. He's, purely a slot right now, and he's hurt on top of it, and he's older. Even at the salary working out, ultimately he hasn't played since week 2, so I just don't think so. If the Bills will definitely go through the wait for the waiver wire or some form of free agent if they're going to go with the receiver room. I don't think that there's any more room to be made there right now, and they probably didn't feel like the reason to use a roster spot right at this stage, because then they're starting to cut some of their depth players. Like, look, if you go and get a receiver right now, who are you cutting? So like you're already thin on the D line. You can't really do anything there. You're cutting Buffalo Joe, who's already now on the special teams, and then Yolofoshio. Like, who are you cutting? Like, so at some point, like it becomes an issue there across the board just to have a little bit more depth at receiver. You're going to need Samuel to produce. Like at some point, he's got to do something even on a game basis. He's got to have an 80-yard game, like just one. It doesn't need to be consistent 80-yard games, but he needs to, when Coleman gets 40 plus snaps a game, he's basically the receiver one. Obviously Cooper's going to take all those snaps this week. But you have Shakir playing a lot, probably gonna play a lot of 12. Mac Hollins plays a lot, but Samuel's got a whole role to himself if Coleman doesn't play, when he doesn't play. So he's got to do something more with these 20 to 30 snaps a game. Otherwise, the Bills have him next year too. Like he's not in an ideal situation. So Brady's got it. That's definitely not someone that Bean just went out and got on his own. That's definitely some influence by Brady. So he's got to answer to why he would have wanted a $8 million receiver and then decided like he didn't know how to use him with Josh Allen. So I don't know if it could be a Josh Allen thing too. Josh is like, I just don't like the way he runs routes or the way he gets open or how he looks down the field, something, because something's not working there. And they'll probably end up blaming the injury, but he's done this his entire career, Curtis Samuel, to some extent.
Yeah, and I would agree with your assessment on Adam Thielen, because I feel like if the Bills were to acquire him or someone of his status, that shows a little bit of desperation. And they didn't have to do that because they already acquired Amari Cooper. So let's just say that they did acquire Adam Thielen yesterday. Then you're thinking, whoa, they must have no confidence in Curtis Samuel. Keon Coleman's injury must be way worse than what we're led on to believe here. So I'm glad that they stood pat with the wide receiver position. They still have KJ Hamler. They still have Terrell Shavers, Jalen Virgil, who they've been elevating. Now, going to safety, this is interesting because the Mike Edwards experience is finally over. And I guess we could just say that in simplest terms, it didn't work out. DeMar Hamlin beat him out. And for whatever reason, Mike Edwards could not get on the field. But I just find it so hard to believe that a guy of Mike Edwards' ability here, like a former third-round pick, played a lot of meaningful snaps for Super Bowl teams in Tampa Bay and Kansas City, and was a very good defensive piece to each of those puzzles. I understand that they like DeMar. He knows the system. They're going to trust that he's going to be in the right place at the right time. And he's just smart. And whether they are doing it because they like his story, I think we're past that point. I think they legit like DeMar Hamlin as a football player now, and he straight up beat him out. I just find it hard to believe that he couldn't even get a roster, or he couldn't even get a jersey. He was just a healthy scratch.
The problem is, and I've talked about this a couple times now with Mike, between the bonuses and the extra escalators that the Bills didn't want any, and even a couple fluke interceptions would have kicked in some escalators, whether he made a good play or not. So there's definitely some escalators. The Bills just being active with a roster and a pick can start to generate some bonuses, and the Bills had no interest in that. Also, from what I've been told, what I've heard, he just got beat out by DeMar Hamlin. The Bills did not expect DeMar Hamlin to be anything more than for safety, jersey guy, special teamer. Like, they really didn't. They didn't have this secret agenda to start DeMar Hamlin. But Bishop went down, and being a rookie, on top of it, Edwards went down twice. Both one in OTAs and one in training camp. So at some point, like, it's just too far behind the eight ball for an external player. It wasn't like it would have been like Christian Benford or something where, it wouldn't have really overly mattered. But you're talking about a guy that's fresh and new into the defensive back situation and in certain roles of coming from two savvy veterans who've had the job for 6 years. That, something had to be done. And DeMar Hamlin knew the defense, and he's played pretty well. He's only allowed 1 touchdown. He's had 2 interceptions, 58 quarterback rating. He was only allowed 180 something yards in coverage. He's been better on the coverage end than I thought. I still think he's a liability for athletically. He does take some bad angles. He's a little bit of aggressive. I don't think he helps as much on the run defense as I thought he would, as he used to. But he's definitely better with coverage than he used to be. So he definitely took some of that run defense and geared it more toward gearing his game to be better in coverage. And he has been better in coverage, period. The run defense has suffered, definitely, in my opinion. But he's been a good safety. He's been a safety, too. He's a guy that much criticized among Bills fans, but he is every level based on any ranking, whether you like PFF, whether you like advanced stats, or even box score. He has generally been in the top half of safeties. At some point, that's a valuable at a $1 million contract. It is what it is. It's cheaper than Mike Edwards. And then on top of it, Mike Edwards didn't play teams. He couldn't beat out anybody for teams, including rookie receivers, backup receivers, shavers, whoever you want to say. Like, he wasn't able to get a jersey. There's no reason you should be calling up players off the practice squad and elevate them and give them a jersey and not Mike Edwards. So if he's not going to play teams, he got beat out has this escalator bonuses that the Bills don't want to have to worry about their cap next year. And then got beat out by DeMar. All factors of and Cole Bishop's going to have their safety job next year. He's going to stay one starter next year. So at some point it's like wrap. And I'd like to give the job now, ideally, to Bishop. And I think the Bills would have too. But if Hamlin's playing good enough, that's a tough bench for no real reason to do so. So ultimately, Cole Bishop has gotten some action, should be the starter day one next year. Bills had a fairly good draft for the most part this season, getting receiver 1 and a defensive tackle, and possibly a safety 1 next year, and a good running back at a pretty good draft. So ultimately, the succession plan's there, and Mike Edwards is just taking up space. Needed to free up a roster spot and needed to free up at least a little bit of cash so they can go out and get Quentin Jefferson. So it made sense. And there's too many right factors, from the injury to the bonuses to DeMar Hamlin, that it does make sense to where and honestly, the Bills felt like he wasn't that good. So it's Brandon Beane had a really good draft. He's had a couple of good drafts back to back, in my opinion. He's had some really good moments. Did not hit on this free agency class at all. Morrow's getting benched. He's getting benched for Yolofoshio, which is maybe another good draft choice. Solomon's been a solid draft choice, potential there. But the safety class between Samuel, Morrow, now cut Edwards, it just hasn't been a unit. And MVS, it hasn't been a good veteran free agent. He did not have a good free agency period. He was working with limited money. He works magic sometimes. But on that front, that's, leading to a Cooper acquisition, leading to a Quentin Jefferson acquisition, etc. He did not have a very good free agency period with limited money. Stephon Diggs trade. But that's the way that it went, in terms of my opinion, for as good as he's been in the draft, in my opinion, the last 2 seasons. didn't have a very good free agency, and we're seeing the some of that fallout today on the show. So what do you think? Any final thoughts in the roster before we bring on Cody to talk some Colts?
Yeah, one final thing I'll say to encapsulate all this. I think that DeMar Hamlin I think you can say the same thing about DeMar that you can about Jordan Phillips or Quentin Jefferson. They're solid players, right? That's as far as I'll go. They're good. They're not great. The question is, will it be enough to get us over the hump? We've tried this before with Jordan Phillips. He's been on those losing teams. Quentin Jefferson was here in 2020 when the Bills came up short. DeMar Hamlin's been part of the Bills when they came up short. So was that enough to really push the needle? A couple of guys that I had on my trade target list, Andre Cisco, Rodney McLeod. I thought Cisco was more of I don't want to say a pipe dream, not because he's that good of a player, but yeah. But I figured that was a little bit more out of the realm of possibility. I figured Rodney McLeod could be like another Mike Edwards just to bolster up that back end of the safety position. But I was just wondering if they would do something just to try to push them over the hump, right? Instead of just running it back with the same players. Jordan Phillips, 32 years old. He's had multiple hamstring injuries, and you just don't know if it's going to hold up. So now the question is, can the Bills get healthy and strike on all cylinders when it matters most? And one final thing I'll say about the safety position is I think now with that fourth safety position being open, I think they'll do one of three things. One, they will elevate Lewis Seen. Two, they will elevate Kareem Jackson. Or three, there's still a glimmer of hope, depending on what kind of a fan you are. Maybe it's not hope, and you're like, no, please stay away from him. But Micah Hyde. I think they are going to fill that spot. Maybe Cam Lewis slides over as a backup safety, but I feel like they're not done. So I'm just curious to see how this plays out, because right now I think Bean has done a good job. I'm just not sure if it's great.
Once again, has had amazing draft moments so far lately. Usually he's been a stud in free agency, but Bean did not have the world's best free agency class. But once again, lots of restrictions there. Dead cap space.
Sorry, I just mean
yesterday specifically.
Yeah, I think Bean's done a great job in his career, but I'm saying for the 2024 Buffalo Bills, specifically what he did this week to try to bolster up the roster ahead of the playoffs and ahead of the stretch run here. Again, solid, but will it take us to the promised land? And that remains
good point by Spin too. Seen is now a linebacker, just so you know.
Officially, it's not even like a hybrid.
No, yeah, I think he's officially in the linebacker room. Yep. So dimebacker potential, that safety, a big safety, big nickel role that Cam Lewis employs. Ingram's been good at this season. Definitely, if an injury to either of those, I would expect to see Lewis Seen in those roles. But you're right on Kareem Jackson's probably the move right now. He's been in this defense now. If it's going to be Kareem Jackson. Speaking of safety, guest of the show, we talked safety a little bit all in the offseason, actually. I was DMing back with Cody back when both teams were looking for safeties at the time, and there were some crossover players, and the Bills had interest in Julian Blackmon and a couple of other safety players, and obviously they went with Mike Edwards instead. What could have been had they made a little different of a decision there, I thought that Blackmon would have been a nice fit in Buffalo. But here we are, another good match. One of my favorite shows, actually, one of my Colts podcasts I'll tune into, BTJ, and always friend of the show, Cody Felger. Cody, thank you so much for coming on for this matchup, man. Lots to talk about. Definitely, the Colts are always a competitive game, especially for the Bills. They've struggled sometimes with the way that they're built. Just like, similar to the Ravens matchups that the Bills play. But Cody, give us a little rundown of what's going on inside Indianapolis. You got a quarterback benching that everyone obviously knows about, but what's going on to bring you to that losing record? The Colts have always been to me, a pretty well rostered team. It's definitely not one when you look at, some of the other teams and you're like, this roster is terrible. Colts usually aren't in that camp. And they're pretty productive. They can be scary if ticking on all cylinders for an AFC competitor. Break it down, man. What's going on first half of the season? Give us your best recap. A lot of people that are watching don't have a huge idea like inside Indy.
Sure. Yeah. And appreciate you inviting me on again. It's always a pleasure to come on to talk ball a little bit. I wish I was a little bit more excited for this game because, like you said, it's been rough for the Colts as of recent. And you guys know as well as anybody, when you take a young quarterback that has the sky-high potential but just needs to play, that's what needs to happen, regardless of the lumps that you'll have along the way. And, I've personally, this whole time, I've been on the side of he needs to play. And it seemed like the Colts were on that side for a while until something changed. And yes, Anthony Richardson has not been good. Don't people like to say if you defend Anthony Richardson, you're saying he's good. I'm not saying that at all. I think he has definitely shown why he was probably the biggest boomer bust guy coming out of that draft by a large margin. But I don't know. For me, I kind of look at it and I say, right now, I just don't understand the direction that the franchise is going. I don't understand what the move is with Joe Flacco. You came out, you preached all week last week about how Joe Flacco gives you the best chance to win. You go out and have by far your worst offensive performance of the season, but the Colts are sticking with Joe Flacco. And so I kind of sit here and I say, yes, on paper as a passer, Joe Flacco definitely, I would say, is a better quarterback right now. But I don't know. For me, it just kind of, it kind of is just this weird spot that the Colts find themselves in where I don't think they're bad enough to be a top 5 draft pick type of team, because you said there is definitely talent on this team. I mean, there's been multiple units that have shown like they can be some of the better in the NFL. But then on the other hand, you just have some very poor decisions and specifically at the quarterback position that just make you wonder, where's the direction of this team going? And for me, I just kind of look at this game and I say, man, the Colts have been in every game this season. That's the one thing I'll say about them, despite the fact they're 4-5. Outside of really this last game with Anthony Richardson, the Colts have been in every single game this year. Now, they haven't won every single game, obviously. They have a losing record. They coming in, they were 4-4. But I don't know. For me, I kind of look at it and I say, this team right now, I don't really feel like they have a direction. I feel like in a lot of ways, their play calling, the personnel, just a lot of things have seriously regressed from where they were a season ago. I mean, we know what the Colts were doing with Gardner Minshew, Zach Moss, and some other backup guys, and now they have some of those guys in there, and it just feels like the Colts have taken a step back in that department in a lot of ways, and it just seems like they've gone away from some of their bread and butter this season. And I'll say this Colts team definitely is a team that has talent. I do think they have a lot of guys that can perform well. But it's just this weird spot the Colts find themselves in where it's like, I don't really know what they're trying to accomplish right now, because I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, even though it's still technically a possibility, like the AFC South, I don't understand like at this point, because I mean, Houston, as much as they've had their struggles this year, I mean, they're by far the better team. I mean, they beat you without, multiple players on their team. And so I'm just kind of in this weird spot with the Indianapolis Colts where I'm like, I don't want them to do what they did in 2022, but also I don't know if that's what it's going to take in order for something to change here in Indianapolis, because we're in year 8 here of Chris Ballard. And, I heard your guys' show a little bit before I hopped on, just about, the state of, where you guys are with, your GM and what you do in the draft and also in free agency. And I just feel like the Colts really lack a GM that's willing to change and a GM that's willing to adapt with the times. I mean, the Colts do not really use free agency at all. And I think that's been one of their biggest issues, is just they've refused to get better when opportunity has presented itself. And the times when they have handed out contracts, I mean, it really hasn't gone well as of recently. Matt Gay, you're paying over $20 million. He is not a good kicker right now. You're paying for Ryan Kelly, who he's not going to be in this game. He's out, but he has played poorly this year. There's multiple other guys I could point to this year, but it just seems like this organization, some of the things that they've held dear, some of the direction that we all kind of were thinking this team was going to go, it kind of seems like the Colts have gone back on their word in a lot of ways, and what, the direction of this franchise. And so it's kind of this rudderless franchise. It kind of feels like the direction right now is there's not really a place where they're going. I don't really know what the final goal is at this point. So it's just a really weird game the Colts find themselves in right now, and a really weird state of the franchise where I don't know if they're going to be bad enough to, like I said, be in, striking distance unless they make a major trade, to get one of those top quarterback prospects. I don't know if they're done with Anthony Richardson, but they're rolling with Joe Flacco, and I guess we'll see what happens.
Cody, I got to ask, what exactly happened when he took himself out a couple weeks ago and said that he was too tired to go back in? Because I know that was a huge story, but like, do you have any ins on that? Like, what actually happened? Because I've never seen an NFL quarterback say that, because usually those are like one of the toughest guys out there, coming from Buffalo here, Josh Allen. You have to like pry him off the field. He will do everything he can to stay on the field to play. And then you have the opposite with Anthony Richardson, and he's like, nah, I'm good. So, like, do you have any inside information, or can you just shed some light on what exactly happened?
Sure. Yeah. And again, I don't have any, inside information necessarily, but from my understanding, I mean, I do believe it was just I do believe it was something where Anthony Richardson, some people have theorized, was he injured, and just kind of played that off that way. Some people have kind of like said, was it just, kind of a young quarterback making a poor decision in the moment, and he didn't really necessarily think of the consequences. I don't know. I kind of find myself in this weird spot where I'm like, I understand from a PR standpoint, it looks terrible and all that stuff. But I think we don't look at the rest of the context, even though, yes, should never do that again. I mean, that was not a smart decision at all. But I kind of look at the rest of that game, and I feel like people are kind of viewing it as like he didn't go back into that game, but he finished that game and actually almost led you to a comeback. And so, so I understand like the PR is not good. It's not a good look for Anthony Richardson. But I'm like, hey, he's a young player. Young players make mistakes. So, you obviously a lot of them don't make that kind of mistake. But things happen. I'm not ready, and I don't think the Colts are yet to give up on this kid. But again, like, at this point, the Colts have pretty much said it didn't have anything to do with that. Now, if you read in between the lines, you might disagree with that. But I would say if it's strictly a situation where the Colts say it's performance-based, I strongly disagree with that. But if it's something where they feel like he needs to just take a step back a little bit and, just kind of realize that, hey, your actions have consequences and you can't be doing that and saying that stuff, like, I understand that a little bit more. But that's kind of what my understanding was of it. I hope that was kind of helpful. I mean, I don't have a ton of insight. The Colts weren't they're pretty tight-lipped about it. They haven't really said a whole lot about it, but I understand it looks very bad. But Anthony Richardson that's been the first time, like, that's not something he does on the regular. Like, I've never seen him do that. I mean, he literally, the play before, was throwing a defender off his back, like a defensive lineman off his back. So I don't know. I understand it's a bad look, but I guess I kind of view it differently than other people view it, in a way where I'm like, hey, you know what? The young kid made a mistake. It was a dumb mistake. It looks really bad. But again, at the end of the day, the big thing we've talked about is how mature Anthony Richardson is. I think he's bound to have some immature moments at times. So that's kind of how I view it. But I understand what kind of message that could send to the locker room, and how people did view it, and maybe how some certain players did view it. But I don't know. I have the sense that this isn't a year-long thing, even though the Colts have kind of said Joe Flacco's our starter moving forward. I'm hoping that it's more of a short-term couple weeks here that we can kind of get back and see, because I just find it like, I think it's the Colts are in kind of the worst place to be, where you're not good and you're old at the quarterback position, and the quarterback that needs reps is not getting them right now. So it's just this weird place you're in right now.
That's why I'm wondering, like, if Richardson didn't pull himself, do you think that they would have turned to Flacco regardless? Like, do you think that the Colts themselves would have said, okay, you just need to sit back for a few weeks, watch how he handles the team, and then we're going to put you back in, let's just say, week 12. But
Right.
So, like, I'm wondering if Richardson kind of had that vibe where he was like, nah, they're giving up on me, so I'm just going to give up on them. Or maybe he was blindsided from it, or maybe the Colts simply made that decision because he pulled himself. That's why, like, there's just so many different angles, and it's hard being in Buffalo. We don't really know exactly, so it's kind of hard to try to piece it together.
The Colts will say it's because of performance, and the Colts will say it's because he needed to take a step back. But again, how much do you believe that? How much of that is PR talk? How much behind the scenes truly is what happened? We'll never know fully what happens there. But that's what the Colts are going with, so that's what I'm going to judge it based off of the information that we have. But yeah, I can't say I'm a big fan of it, because I'm like, unless you're just out on him and going to draft another quarterback, the kid needs reps, man. He hasn't even played a full season, and he's already on the bench. Now, hopefully it's not a season-long thing, because I think that's about the worst thing you can do, especially if Joe Flacco clearly doesn't give you the best chance to win. your offense is what it is right now, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. I mean, your offense is a mess. I think it starts with Shane Steichen, and there's a lot of factors into that. But, yeah, there's just a lot going on here with this Colts team and so much drama. I sometimes have to just get away from it all because it's kind of nuts right now. But, yeah, it's a mess right now in Indianapolis. I won't lie to you.
Yeah, so I know, and I mean, obviously, I follow your co-host Derek too, and I think you guys are pretty on the same page with the benching for the most part. But it seems like for me, like I didn't really care that. So I'm on the other side of it. I don't really care he took himself out. Like having a quarterback that I cover, Josh Allen, it's just not. He's such a veteran. Whether you rank him 2 or 3 in the rankings doesn't really matter. And he's just a little different of a player. I followed Anthony Richardson since his high school days almost, and he's on QB1, the show on Netflix. And I just think he has a really solid upbringing and a really great mantra. I personally would not be benching him. And we'll take a look now at the team. Yeah, unfortunately, he's not in it. So we're going to, don't want to spend too much time potentially. And someone's not going to see this game at least. But I think it's going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to have a Joe Flacco injury, quote unquote, at some point or something where he's going to get back in. I mean, that's how I see them getting more on both sides of it, where Flacco may get a little dinged up at some point if he does. And I think it's an easy PR spin of being like, well, he got hurt now. Anthony Richardson's back in for the last 4 or 5 games. Probably has to do with Flacco's performance, let's be honest. Probably has to do with the Colts offensive performance. And if not much change, they go through Buffalo in a couple other games and nothing's different. Look, Anthony Richardson's EPA was terrible. And on a performance basis, I could see why a head coach who's trying to win football games, who's trying to on a week or middle week, AFC minus a couple of the top teams, AFC is pretty weak. So the 7 seed, the 6 seed, with the Jets and the Dolphins being down, the Jags and the Titans being down, like there's a legitimate wild card operation that's going to a young and average Denver team, in my opinion. That's like right there in LA is not overly solid. So there's a legitimate path to the playoffs. I could see that using that as a way to just bench him per performance. They want to win football games, in my outsider's opinion. They're not trying to tank. They're not trying to do any of that. And they probably feel Joe Flacco. They saw what he did in the Browns last year, taking him at the end of the year into the playoffs. And they probably set, like, let's see if we can get any of that magic. As you mentioned, you didn't see any of it this weekend. And the entire DVOA from the Indianapolis Colts looks like it dropped based on that performance last week, ranked 21st in offense per DVOA. Ranked 17th last week, now 19th. So you got to dip there. My question to you, man, let's start with the offense. What's going on with Jonathan Taylor? He's always productive, didn't get going against a good Vikings team. The Bills have seen him, the Bills haven't played the Colts a lot lately, beat them in the playoffs with Phillip Rivers. Prior to that, I mean, they really haven't played much since. Josh Allen's never beaten the Colts in the regular season. That's a little they've played. They obviously won in the playoffs, but talk to me about Jonathan Taylor. You generally always have a good offensive line with Quentin Nelson. So you mentioned Kelly, break it all down for me, like what's going on. And you mentioned it being Steichen's issue. The EPA doesn't look good. The DVOA doesn't look great. So tell me about what's going on. Why is it a mess?
Yeah, for sure. And, to the Jonathan Taylor point, I just don't think he's being utilized nearly enough. I do feel like when he's on the field, he's very effective, but it seems like the Colts kind of go away from him sometimes. And that's kind of part of the personnel, part of the, just the offensive play calling. There's literally a drive in the second half of that Minnesota game where the Colts were just running it down Minnesota's throat. Like they were going all the way down the field. They threw it 2 times. They turned it over. So for me, it's just like, it just seems like in the critical moments, the Colts, again, they don't go back to their bread and butter. They don't go back to the thing that we all know the Colts are going to be this year, and that's running the football with Jonathan Taylor. I think Jonathan Taylor has not lost a step by any stretch. He's fantastic. He's still one of the best running backs in the league, but I just don't think he's being utilized properly, and I just don't think a lot of these players are being utilized properly. It just seems like the Colts, for whatever reason, think they're a team that can air it out and throw the ball 50 times. That's just not a reality with this team. And I don't know. There's just been multiple times where I'm like, it's clear what you can do. Like, so why aren't you doing it a little bit more? And I just feel like the Colts have not nearly leaned into their superstars enough. The first one being Jonathan Taylor. Talking about this offense overall, Michael Pittman Jr. has been hurt, but he's been playing. It's very clear he's not himself. I mean, he's just nowhere near the Michael Pittman he was last year. Now, credit him for playing through the injury, but it's almost to a situation where it's like maybe he should go on IR, just rest it up and not make it worse, because he's really not being that effective. The week that he played after he found out about the injury, he played well, but then since then he really hasn't done a whole lot. Josh Downs has been the best player on this offense. Josh Downs has been absolutely electric for the Indianapolis Colts. I think far and away, honestly, guys, he's been the best player, the best receiver on this team. I really think he has been the best receiver on this team by a large margin at this point. And the Colts really missed him the first couple weeks of the season. And I just think he is so electric in what he does out of the slot. I think he's one of the best slot receivers in the NFL. And I just think he's a player that, you cannot afford to, let him do what he does, because he will carve you up. Coming out of North Carolina, he was that, big possession guy. He got a lot of targets, a lot of catches, but he just does so much in that short to intermediate game. But he also can run that deep route too. Like, he's not just, the one trick pony there. He can do a little bit of everything. So Josh Downs is a fantastic football player. Alec Pierce, he's kind of feast or famine. Like, he can get on the deep ball, but the Colts obviously didn't even try that. It didn't seem like, and everything like that. So, and Adonai Mitchell as well. He's been pretty quiet this year. He hasn't really done a whole lot for the Colts. There's a lot of high expectations for him, and he really hasn't done a whole lot for the Indianapolis Colts this year, and haven't really seen a whole lot from him. He did have a nice catch in that Vikings game, but he's really not. I would say he's the fourth option right now, clearly, on this Colts receiving core. And, tight ends are virtually invisible. There's really no tight end. I think that's something the Colts have to address this offseason. They have like 20 tight ends, but none of them, really make an impact. So it's just a lot of average to below average guys right now. And the Colts don't even target them. So they don't even use their tight ends hardly at all. When it comes to this offensive line for the Colts, it's very banged up right now. Bernard Ryman missed last week's matchup. He was dealing with a concussion. He was in concussion protocol. Again, we'll have to see on that, see if he's good to go. If not, it'll be rookie offensive tackle Matt Gonzalez, who the Colts took in round 3. I thought he was fine, for a rookie kind of being tasked to, protect the blind side of your quarterback. I thought he was fine for what he did, being kind of thrown into there at left tackle. But if Ryman comes back, that's definitely a huge boost for this offense. We obviously know what Quentin Nelson does as one of the best guards in football. You mentioned Ryan Kelly, and this has been something. Ryan Kelly's been one of the biggest kind of proponents of, not really liking what Anthony Richardson did, and being pretty vocal about it. And my thing with Ryan Kelly is, we talk about the standard. He mentioned that it's not the standard we want, but Ryan Kelly's been a very poor center this year, very poor. He's been in the mid-20s when it comes to rankings of centers. He's being paid like a top 10 center. So, I mean, that's just not acceptable. But it'll be another rookie, Tanner Bortolini, out of Wisconsin. He has actually played very well. He's actually according to PFF, he's actually highly graded than Ryan Kelly has been this season. So I kind of look at it as like, this might be Ryan Kelly's, that might have been his last starting game in Indianapolis. If Tanner Bortolini plays well and continues to do this, he's obviously the future for this team. Ryan Kelly's in a contract year. He's over the age of 30. He's often injured. So, I mean, honestly, some people are viewing this as an upgrade for the Colts at center. And then right guard, Dalton Tucker's been the guy. He's an undrafted guy as well. He's been just fine. And then Braden Smith at right tackle. Right now, Braden Smith and Quentin Nelson are really the only two veterans that are out there. It's a lot of young guys, even Ryman and himself. He was drafted in 22. So there's a lot of young guys on this offensive line, but I actually think this offensive line, if Ryman plays, I think this offensive line will be just fine. I really do think they'll be just fine in this game, but I don't know. If Ryman doesn't play, it'll be a little bit more interesting because you'll be basically having 3 rookies starting for this offensive line, and that's definitely nothing to scoff at. But yeah, it's a really beat up unit right now. But the one thing the Colts did well this offseason is they invested in the trenches, and it's really paying off. And you got a lot of guys here that you're viewing as these guys are your future at the offensive line. And you drafted 2 of them, and you had an undrafted guy that's playing a lot of minutes right now. So yeah, for me, I kind of look at it and I say, yeah, this unit's beat up, but that might not be a bad thing because the Colts have a lot of contracts that they're paying guys right now. And, especially Ryan Kelly's not living up to that contract right now. So that's kind of where the Colts are on offense. It's been kind of in neutral right now. I think the biggest thing for me, the biggest issue, you can talk about quarterback, you can talk about, whatever you want to talk about. To me, it has been Shane Steichen. Plain and simple. It has been Shane Steichen. I don't know what has happened, but Shane Steichen went from looking like one of the better offensive play callers a year ago to this year. It just seems like he's overwhelmed. And I don't know if it's just the pressures of not just calling plays and being a head coach. Some guys can do it. Some guys can't. I don't know if Shane Steichen needs to consider, handing over the play calling, but something is not right because it's been consistently very poorly called games by Shane Steichen and some very questionable personnel decisions as well, on, third and fourth down when you don't have Jonathan Taylor or Michael Pittman out there. It's like, what are we doing? And so just kind of some of those situations where it feels like situationally the Colts have not necessarily been the wisest this year.
Well, Cody, along those lines, one last thing I'll say about the offense before we switch over to the defense. Speaking from a fantasy perspective, I drafted Michael Pittman this year because I had him last year and he was very productive and it seemed like you could get like a consistent 15 to 20 points out of him. And I know you said that back injury has really been hampering him this year, but Alec Pierce is another guy. You mentioned him and he's just very boom or bust because I'm always like, should I take a waiver wire on him? Should I do it? And then it's like, I don't think so, just because he'll get 20 points one week and then put up a donut the next week and then Adonai Mitchell too. So going off of your point about Shane Steichen, is this more of a Alec Pierce, Adonai Mitchell? You can't say it's a Jonathan Taylor problem because we know his production, but do you think that if they had better play calling that we could see more production out of these guys, or are these just players that can't really produce on a consistent level at this NFL level?
Well, yeah, and Alec Pierce that's kind of been his thing. I think he's been better this year than he's been in years past. He was kind of that, you throw it deep or he doesn't do anything for you. And I think he's been better in certain ways. I do think, the two factors for me, I do think A.D. Mitchell definitely has a part in this, but I think the two factors for me, play calling is one, and then I think just a consistent quarterback. Like, say what you want about Gardner Minshew, he actually spread the ball around pretty well last year. He didn't necessarily throw the ball deep. That was kind of his Achilles heel, but, he got guys the ball on a consistent basis, and you just haven't had that. I mean, Anthony Richardson has not been able to do that. Joe Flacco has, he's done it a little bit, but he didn't do it a week ago. And I don't know. I think it's, for me, I put the biggest blame on Shane Steichen, but I think a consistent quarterback to get them the ball has also been a major issue this year. And I think those two factors, kind of play into it because I do think you look at these players, especially Alec Pierce, and for a while, Alec Pierce, I think, was the best receiver on this roster. Whenever Josh Downs was down, I do think Alec Pierce, for a while, he was really starting to come on. But they don't go to him. I don't think they target him near enough. I think he needs to have at least 3 or 4 deep shots every game because at the worst, I think you're getting at least an opportunity for defensive pass interference right there. And, it's obvious that he's a weapon when the Colts target him. But like you mentioned, it's either feast or famine with him. He goes from having, you look at some of these games, he goes from, 3 catches for 134 against the Jaguars to 0 catches the next week against the Titans. It's so inconsistent. And I just think it starts with the play calling, but also you don't have a quarterback, at least at this moment, that can spread the ball around on a consistent basis.
Yeah, looking at the box score here, so he's the leading receiver with 435 yards. He only has 19 catches. Josh Downs, who's had a very solid year, I almost put a waiver in for him, but I got beat out by it, so I was unable to get Josh Downs. Apparently, I like the Colts' weapons this year, but he has 411 yards on double the amount of receptions. Yes. So, yeah, I guess it's just a little perplexing sometimes when you have the Shane Steichen effect or the different quarterback play. And of course, you could always put the blame on the players and say maybe they're not running the right routes. But I guess just to answer the original question is probably just combination of everyone, right? Everyone. Absolutely. And everything.
Yep, 100%.
And actually, sorry, one last thing. While we were talking about that, it made me think, wasn't there a really bad play call in the playoffs last year? Like they didn't give it to Jonathan Taylor and that's how they lost?
Yeah, the fourth down call against the Texans, yes. Yeah, it was a play where Jonathan Taylor wasn't even in the game for whatever reason.
That's right. I know they went to Goodson, right?
Yeah, they threw to Goodson and bad pass, but also he should have probably caught it. But yeah, it was kind of a situation where it's like, why aren't you putting your best player out there? I don't have a problem with going toward. I don't even have a problem with the play call. I just have a problem with not putting your best player out there. And that's been kind of my biggest beef with Shane Steichen is I feel like there's been multiple moments this year where you're like, why is Jonathan Taylor not in this game? I mean, I think it was a Green Bay game. The Colts had an opportunity to go down there and score, but Jonathan Taylor, they took him out of the game. And I still don't really know why they did that. And I just feel like they consistently do that. And I think Shane Steichen has just personnel decisions this year have not been good from him. And it's been very puzzling onto why you pay these guys what you pay them and you don't go to them in a critical moment. So it doesn't make any sense to me.
Very interesting. Before last week, the Colts are the only team that have every single game between 2 and 6 points. It's wild. They still made it a 1-score possession at the end with kicking the field goal to make it 8. Still every 1 possession game. So obviously 4 and 5 in 1 possession games. But it's a wild stat. Like you look at other teams and can make or break your season. You've seen teams like, I think it's the Chiefs who've now 6-0 in 1-score games. And, they're the Chiefs, they have Mahomes, but at some point that does regress a little bit to the mean. And the Colts have played already a ton of 1-score games for the most part. Very interesting to see that on the schedule. And, definitely some winnable games in there. Like the Jags lost by 3. The Titans win by 3. You played a bad Dolphins team. We know them very well. Just a completely different team without Tua. We saw the best of them last week. They really played really well. That Dolphins team's completely different. And they're going to miss the playoffs, but ultimately it's a good team. So I just think, Cody, I just think the Colts can still flirt around with one of these last wild card spots. Just from an outsider's perspective, at least, that there's a lot of talent on the roster. I know there's some O-line injuries. Definitely some challenges. And we're going to have to switch to defense here to end that kind of wrap what kind of your thoughts up are. But I definitely think there's some room here. And that's probably why the move to Joe Flacco happened. So it's going to be interesting to see how they play down the stretch. And there's definitely some winnable games on your schedule as you look at. Obviously you got the Bills, Lions. That's tougher. But then you got, New England. Denver, Titans, Giants, Jags. That's quite the way to finish after that Lions game. There's a stretch there. And Joe Flacco's been known for those stretches. And I'm going to imagine that played a little bit into, if we play some of these bad teams, we need to get W's. Joe Flacco may be able to do a 4-1 there. And that really puts you in position if you can stay alive, right now. And that's, by the Bills, Jets, Lions stretch. If you can stay alive and, do something special in that stretch, you never know. So that's I kind of get the idea, even as our Anthony Richardson guy, just from I want to win football games perspective, but as a roster development schedule, that's not right. I think you probably, if you lose to the Bills, whatever, you lose to the Lions, whatever, but at some point it's probably wasn't the right move to bench AR at this stage, maybe at the end of the year if you needed to, but I think you go back to him at some point, unless Flacco really has you ticking on all cylinders. It didn't look like it last week, and he certainly has a tough matchup against McDermott, who, say what you want, maybe in the playoffs against a top 3 quarterback, but McDermott against, 12 to 18th ranked quarterbacks, 20th ranked, he is known to play a very solid defensive game plan, the Geno Smiths of the world. So, it's going to be a challenging matchup where I would think and hope that they would lean on Jonathan Taylor. But if we look at your defense for a minute, there's some concerning stats. So talk to me about the defense, why they're 26 DVOA against the pass. That's definitely a concern, that the Bills will probably equally, and now on their end, they're going to probably try to exploit, 28th against the pass. That's concerning. And so what's going on with the Indianapolis Colts second? Is it a secondary issue? Is it a Gus Bradley issue? Why that's poor pass coverage? What's going on in the defensive pass front?
Yeah, and I'll say this: the defense the last 2 or 3 weeks has been a lot better than it started out. Started out very poorly, and Gus Bradley, even though the defense has played better, he is a major issue. I don't really see a situation unless this defense just completely, turns into a top 10 unit. It's just hard for me to see the Colts keep Gus Bradley because it was an issue like that Jaguar game. Like you had that game won and you let them drive right down the field and score. And that's a bad Jaguar team. And there's just multiple opportunities where it just felt like guys were running wide open and the Colts didn't have any answers for it. The pass rush was non-existent. The Colts have been hit hard on that defensive line with injuries. I mean, they had their leading sacker from a year ago, Samson Ebukam, before the season started, out for the year or a majority of the year. I don't know if he'll come back at this point. Tyquan Lewis, who is a really good player, he's been a role player, but he could step into that role and play some good football for you. He's been injured. Laiatu Latu's had his moments, but he's still a rookie. You've had moments with Dio Adangbo as well. But there was a couple games stretch in there where the Colts didn't get a sack. I think it was like something like 12 quarters or something like that where the Colts didn't get a sack. It was like a couple games or something like that where it was kind of bizarre how the Colts weren't able to even affect the quarterback. And, your secondary can only do so much. And also I think you go to the fact of the Colts had ample opportunities to address the secondary in the offseason, and they chose to do nothing. I mean, they literally did nothing this offseason. They rolled with the guys they had from a year ago, and one of your starting corners goes out for the year in Juju Brents. And I think a lot of us were thinking, oh man, I mean, this Colts team, they're dead in the water in this secondary. I mean, it's going to be historically bad. It could be that reaching those levels. But to give the Colts credit, while it hasn't been perfect, I think their secondary has played a lot better in the last couple of weeks. I think in a large part due to some of these younger players stepping up in the secondary. Jalen Jones, who is kind of that number 2 corners, kind of stepped into that number 1 corner role. He's a 7th-round pick from last year. And while he's not been perfect at all, I think he's been solid enough to be that number 2 corner for the Colts. Samuel Womack, who nobody, was thinking about. I mean, he was a waiver claim. I mean, everybody was thinking special teams. Juju Brents goes down, and the other corner that you think, potentially is going to get time in Dallas Flowers looks terrible, and he gets cut. And so it's Samuel Womack's job. And to his credit, yeah, he hasn't been perfect either, but he has played some really good football for this Colts team. And he's actually held it down, I think, fairly well. And I think this Colts secondary has been able to do some things against some pretty decent passing teams too. I mean, the last 2 weeks, you think about it, playing against the Houston Texans, playing against the Minnesota Vikings, and all the weapons that both those teams have. I mean, the secondary, while they haven't been perfect, I think they've been far from the issue with this team so far through the course of this season. Julian Blackmon's been a pretty good safety. Nick Cross, I think, has taken the step you hoped he would take. A lot of people were clamoring, including myself, for the Colts to go make a veteran move at safety. They stayed pat. That worked out, and Nick Cross has been pretty good. I think you feel good about the future of him, at least, at your safety position. But the big issue with this Colts team, I think, has been their run defense. I mean, the run defense has been historically bad. I mean, there was multiple games this year where teams were rushing for nearly 200 yards, if not more, on this team. I mean, it was that bad. It was reaching historically bad moments. And I do think this defense as a whole, even though I still think there's a lot of issues with this defense, I think they have shorted up a lot. I really do think. I think the last 3 weeks, guys, this Colts defense that they had halfway competent offense, they played winning football. They've done more than enough to win these games. And last week, the Colts had 3 turnovers and 1 defensive score. I mean, they outscored the offense a week ago. So for me, yeah, this secondary is still young. They have their issues. This defense still clearly has a lot of issues. I think it's definitely going to there's going to be some things that need to be addressed, no doubt. But the defense has been far from the issue as of recent. And so I would say don't be surprised, and I could be wrong on this, but don't be surprised if this Colts defense actually gives the Bills some trouble on offense. Like, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it could, because they've actually shown in the last couple of weeks they actually can do some things. And I feel like, to Gus Bradley's credit, as much as he gets dragged through the mud, in certain ways, the Colts have played a lot better, and Gus Bradley deserves some credit in that. So, yeah, I mean, I think this defense, it was a unit that we were all terrified of because the Colts really didn't do a whole lot in the offseason to address it. I think they found their footing a little bit.
Cody, so you have 3 defensive players in the top 10 in terms of total tackles this year. So Zaire Franklin is leading the league with 95 tackles. Yes. Then you have Nick Cross tied for 4th with 86. And then EJ Speed is right below Dorian Williams, actually, with the Bills. So Dorian has 84, and then EJ Speed has 82. So, I mean, on paper, that looks good, right? You have 3 guys in the top 10 for tackles. But is that maybe an indictment on this defense that is giving up the 4th most total yards? You mentioned the run defense. They're giving up the 2nd most rushing yards per game. So is that just because of the volume and like they're facing so many plays that, yeah, they have a lot of tackles, but it didn't have to be that way. And maybe the defense just can't get off the field. I know you said the last few weeks they've been better, but I mean, is that because they are really good defensive players or just because this Colts defense just hasn't been up to par this year?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different reasons. I think definitely Zaire Franklin's, he's always been a tackle guy. He's been near the top the last couple of years in terms of tackles. But the other couple guys, I mean, Nick Cross, like I said, he's definitely taken a step up. I think he's been a really good safety for the Colts this year. But yeah, I think it is an indictment on this defense, especially early on, not being able to get off the field on 3rd down, not being able to stop the run. And also, if you throw it back to the offense, if you look at the time of possession, the Colts are losing miserably in that department. I mean, the offense can't stay on the field. Defense can't get off the field because they're tired. And it's just kind of this vicious cycle. Now, the defense, they were bad, especially early. But as of recent, that's kind of probably been part of it too, is like, yeah, the Colts have maybe gotten off the field somewhat and a little bit better, but also they've been on the field like their defense has like double the amount of time of the opposing team. So that is a part of it as well. But yeah, as of recent, it's definitely been more of the offense. But early on, it was 100% the defense and their issues, because it didn't matter if it was 3rd and short or 3rd and 20. The Colts you almost could count on the Colts giving it up. It was that bad. But they've shorted up a little bit, which is good. But the offense has done them no favors the last 3 weeks. And here we are with the Colts.
And they've,
I don't know. I have to check the stats. I would say they're probably, if not the worst, one of the worst teams in time of possession battles right now, because their offense can't sustain a drive to save their life, and their defense has struggled this year to get off the field.
Yeah, 34% of the time, or excuse me, they are in 24th for 43% of the time they allow 3rd down conversion. So that's right there it's definitely going to play a role into continuing to stay on the field. And then when you have an offense in the bottom 22 as well, at 3rd down conversions, you're going to get on the field a lot. So maybe some of the defensive metrics, whether tackles or whether it's total yards or whatever you want to use, are a little bit inflated due to some circumstantial data of what's going on in game flow specifics in the situations. But you look at, obviously from a linebacker perspective, the Bills are going to stretch you there. They're going to press you. They will now, based on the Dolphins game and what have they done against the Titans, they will press your linebackers and they will make you make play-winning football. Josh Allen's not turning the ball over like teams are expecting him to. And he is taking the stuff that maybe he didn't take, that the Bills have been asking him to take for years. You're going to have good linebacking play. Obviously you have a pretty good nickel, in my opinion, one of the best in the league. So that should be a benefit to where, the Bills really use Khalil Shakir. Really, like you mentioned about Downs, the Bills, Shakir is the same version. Like he's a guy that, leads the league in a lot of EPA metrics, catch rate, broken tackles. He's definitely a machine in the slot. So Josh Allen's going to stretch you with a lot of the linebacking play is huge to beat the Bills. If you don't have it, it's tough. If you have it, you got a really good opportunity. The only way to really get around that, like any team, though, is pass rush. Unless you're in the top couple in the league, Josh Allen doesn't get sacked. So it's really a matter of like, does the linebacking play there? Because you're going to have to drop into some cover 2 zones. Some teams have been playing more man against the Bills than usual, which is interesting because they baited Josh to run and he hasn't been running. So tell me about what, kind of wrap up the defense by telling me you're going to see a lot of cover 2 high shell. Is Gus Bradley going to send a lot of exotic blitzes, which Josh Allen's been known to beat, but you can get them if not down, but to make a bad play. So there's definitely, and if the linebacking plays there, it's really, really tough for any team from the division opponents the Bills play to a playoff game. Are the Colts linebackers good enough today to, quote unquote, I mean, it's only like a 5-point spread. I mean, it's not that much to beat a Bills team that it's going to take linebacking play. Otherwise, it becomes a long day for defenses.
Yeah, and that's been the Colts' issue, I think, a lot of times with their linebackers is they've been not that great in coverage. I don't really think either of the linebackers for the Colts, Zaire Franklin or EJ Speed are that great in coverage this year. So that's
and Franklin's hurt, right? He's hurt.
Which one?
Franklin?
No, I think he's good. I think he's playing.
Okay. He missed practice. Maybe is that just like
okay. I haven't checked the practice report today, but yeah, I mean, and the Colts are without probably their best coverage linebacker in Jalen Carlisle, who got injured. Right. So yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's going to be a big issue. I think the Colts are not great in coverage with linebackers at all. I mean, and Gus Bradley doesn't blitz really at all. The Colts are one of the least blitzing teams in the NFL. So that for me is a recipe for disaster for this Colts team. Now, Bradley's kind of changed it up a little bit. So maybe we see more of that. Maybe he's kind of figured it out a little bit, but that's really never been him as a coordinator. So that is kind of one of my biggest issues because it feels like about every time the Colts, an opponent plays the Colts defense, usually the guys the linebackers lined up against, tight ends or whoever, usually have pretty big games. So I'm a little bit concerned about that because I don't think the Colts have necessarily the guys right now in coverage to handle what the Bills are going to throw at them. I think that the Bills are going to feast there. The Colts have really notoriously struggled the last couple of years in coverage with their linebackers. And, that's kind of been a big issue so far this year for them. So that is a big concern for me. I do think the Bills will have some success doing that because I don't think the Colts have the personnel right now to handle that.
Yeah, I did not practice today, so I'm not sure if that's if that's just a tune-up thing or if that's a legitimate concern. But that would be a concern if I was a Colts fan for sure.
Say if he misses time, it'd probably be Grant Stewart. I mean, he's the same kind of mold. He's not really going to excel in coverage, so it's still kind of the same thing there.
Okay, very interesting. It could be a situation where it could be just a short term, like rest a couple days, but. Yeah. After playing a lot, but did not practice with his ankle injury. So for whatever that's worth, it's interesting to see one of your top guys missing time, but he's probably definitely a player who can, probably practice Friday and be okay, I'm assuming. But bringing it into Indianapolis, give me the final vibes and then give me your score prediction. What are the vibes out of Indy? Or is it something you think you can go on a run with? Is it like, well, we'd rather just develop Richardson or see how we finish? Like, what's the vibes when the Bills go into Indianapolis this weekend and play, in a dome where Josh Allen's numbers are drastically better inside. He was pretty adamant in wanting a dome here when they're building our brand new stadium here that's getting ready soon. Was disappointed to know it's only got the overhang and not the full covered situation. Probably wanted something like Indy. So Josh Allen's usually better in those environments. I think his stats are up when I was researching about 27% indoors. But tell me about in terms of the vibes. Like, is it like a we'll see. Is it like a playoff vibe? Is it like a let's just develop and see what we can draft vibe? And then from there, we'll then get you your final prediction here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the vibes after what happened on Sunday Night Football are not good. I mean, I think a lot of people are feeling pretty defeated right now. And I mean, you heard Shane Steichen. I mean, he's saying some of the stuff that the last head coach said. It's on me. That's what Frank Reich kept saying. And then he was gone. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that's kind of the vibes we're getting where it's like you can only say that so much until something has to change, something has to give. And I just feel like the fans right now, I don't think there's really much optimism, to be honest with you. I mean, the Colts may have a different vibe inside that locker room, but It just doesn't seem like that's kind of the vibe right now. And I wouldn't be surprised at all, guys, if Lucas Oil, there's a lot of boo birds, when the Colts take the field. I think fans are not happy. I mean, I think if you took a poll, I would say somewhere around the 90% of fans are very upset with the Colts and what they're doing and the organization and where they're going. I mean, I think this is honestly, guys, probably the most united I've seen the Colts, fan base since the do not hire just Saturday a couple years ago. It's been that. I mean, honestly, like
With the Richardson news, you mean like playing Richardson specifically?
Just playing Richardson and the direction this franchise is going. Gotcha. The thing that they preached to fans and tried to sell fans on, only to come out and look like that. I mean, that's just kind of where we're at. And it's just like, I think a lot of fans are totally okay if this team loses the rest of the season, and again, I know it's crazy to say, being in striking distance, but I think it's like, if you don't have a young quarterback that's developing, you don't have a future in this league. I mean, honestly. So that's kind of, I think, where fans are right now. And I think fans will, if the Colts get if the Colts lose, I don't think fans are going to be that upset, to be honest with you, which is crazy because you want to win every game. But if you're not doing it with your young kid, I don't really like. What's the best case scenario here? You sneak into the wild card, you still have questions at quarterback. I don't know so that's kind of where I think the fan base is right now. I think playoffs guys are the furthest thing from this fan base's mind right now. I think they're so done with this organization. I think they're fine if this organization, from top to bottom gets scrubbed down and restarts. I mean, honestly, like everything from the GM, some people, the owner, the head coach, the whole coaching staff, people are just ready for something new. I really do believe it because you're in year 8. You haven't won the division. You haven't won a week 1 game. You haven't won in Jacksonville. I mean, there's so many things this team just has not done that it's like any other franchise has done at least one of those things.
Makes
and you
sense.
just haven't. So that's kind of the reality the Colts find themselves in right now. And it's just a weird reality to be in where it's just like, even if I'd rather, I'm always the thing. I'm like, if you're going to be bad with a young quarterback. Don't be bad with a 40-year-old. Like, be bad with a kid that could develop into something. And you guys get that because you had, Josh Allen wasn't great his first couple of years. He wasn't the best, but he had to take that time to develop. And I wish the Colts would do that. I think a lot of people are on that train now.
Yeah, Josh played 500 football 2018, 2019. They were good. The roster was pretty good for the most part, but did play 10-6 football at the time, and then catapulted into his 3rd year starting, 2.5 season, really. I mean, once the Bills realized, like, hey, wait a second, he's like a, roughly a 16-12 quarterback as a winning percentage while developing. It was a little bit easier in the Bills' case to where played 500 ball with a bad roster, played 10-win ball with a decent roster, and then like, it was a little bit easier for the Bills to be like, we're just going to play him out. And they saw lots of talent. I wish, as a Richardson fan too, wish the Colts would do the same. And I still think they'll go to him probably in 3 weeks, maybe after that Lions game. Maybe not that early, but it would make sense if they kind of feel like they're out of it a little bit. Not that I want the Colts out of it, but if they feel that they're out of it, they probably are like, all right, now it makes 0 sense to play Joe Flacco in this football game any further. There's some winnable games down here. The path isn't very clear to make the playoffs. We can get some real momentum beating the Titans or whatever the final stretch there is for the Colts. Titans, Giants, Jags specifically is definitely a stretch where you got to play Richardson in those 3 games. If you don't, I don't know. Maybe if you're really in the playoff race, but that's a stretch where I think that AR should be back in the lineup. Real quickly, Josh Allen stats 7-0 in a dome. That's actually shockingly, he's only played 7 regular season games in dome, though. 70%, up 8% on his completion percentage, up 70 yards overall in a game, and up 12 to 16 points in quarterback rating in a dome. No wonder why Josh tried to convince Terry Pagula to put a dome on the Bills' new stadium and pay another $500 million. But Josh generally requests really good weather. Rainy, slippery, that kind of stuff really does bother Josh Allen, in my opinion. And we get a lot of it in Buffalo, even though his run game will increase. Overall, his pass performances do take a drastic dip with the way he plays football. And he's been clearing that. I didn't realize he was 7-0 though. But Cody, give me your final takeaway from this game. I know you kind of just did, but give me your final score prediction. We ask everybody. You can say whatever you want, but you don't get offended. You can take 10-point Colts win. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. Give me your final prediction, and then finally after that, tell us what's the rest of the season going to look like for the Colts.
Yeah, the final score I kind of have in my mind is 31-17. I think Buffalo handles them pretty easily. I really do. I mean, I think this team, like, it's just different, But saying that, like you said, the Colts have been in every game, so maybe I should adjust that score a little bit more. Maybe it's something where the Colts get a late score and cut it back into it. But I think this could be a game where it's a tipping point for a lot of people. If the Colts go out there and get blown out, with Joe Flacco, and they look terrible again for the second straight week, it's like, what are we going to do? And there's already a ton of questions, and, it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of direction right now. And, I just don't really believe that this Joe Flacco offense is going to get it going as much as the Colts want you to believe it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen. I mean, I really don't. And especially because you said, the Bills have a pretty good pass defense, pretty good defense in general. So I think they're going to have some moments, especially with the Colts being as banged up as they are, how poor they've looked on offense, and the Bills having what they have, I think it's a possibility that this Colts, maybe this is their first game where they're not within a score. So 31-17 was what I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, the Bills can definitely do that to teams. Like, they're one of the largest amount of wins, 10 plus wins, even more than Mahomes. They will drop a November game, though. Every year they do it. They've done it to Denver last year. You've seen them lose to the Patriots at this point, occasionally a bad Patriots team. They have done it a little bit. It's not a crazy trend, but once a year they do seem to drop a November game. Bills have the Chiefs. They've been thinking about that. They need it for seeding purposes. The division's 4 games away, so they don't really have anyone pushing them too hard. Like one of the largest leads, in AFC East, since, I'm sure Brady had one, but it's not very common in the AFC East like that. So there's not a lot of back end motivation. They're looking at the Chiefs and a bye then into San Francisco and Detroit. So they definitely have a power stretch of really proving if they're a top 3 team or not. So those things are a little bit concerning. We said the same things about maybe a Seattle or another game where the Bills could have done the same thing. So one way or the other, the Bills could really not play great football and really give the Colts a really breathing chance, or they have done that and they went to Seattle and crushed the Seahawks. So they can do that too. So it is interesting. It is a weird time of year for the Bills right now before they pick it up in middle to end of November. It is a strange stretch from late October to early November, when the Bills will traditionally kick around in the mud a little bit just as they prepare for their playoff stretch. So there's definitely some hope. I know Josh Allen's numbers are really good indoors, but it doesn't take much in a 60-minute football game for one weird turnover. They're crushing in the turnover department this season, but some regression there, like we talk about one-score games, can really affect a football game over 60 minutes. So we'll see, man. I always like going to Indy. They're probably my favorite team in your division. I'm going to always think you got a chance at that wild card spot. I really do. I'm going to say that a couple times, but Joe Flacco is, I got to prove it. He's got to, this would go a long way for his case, though. Joe Flacco's got to feel it too. I don't know how much he cares. Josh has had some nice things to say about him, but it's his career's here. Maybe he doesn't care anymore. But this is kind of knows Richardson's taken back over at some point. Does he have the rest of the year or not? This go a long, long way. Getting crushed won't do anything. Winning, though, will prove the right decision to the fan base in front of the fans. And maybe if you beat the Bills, you guys would be talking about the playoffs, though. So there is a little bit of motivation from Joe Flacco, at least in the offense's perspective, compared to maybe how the fans are feeling. So we'll see what ends up turning out and how this thing goes. Cody, where can our listeners follow you, find you? What do you got working? How do you think that this wraps up here for the Colts?
Yeah, well, I appreciate, as always, you guys invited me on. You can find me on X. You can find us on YouTube. You can find me on X at CP Felger 55. You can find us on X at BTJ Pod. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that stuff. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find us on there. I'm going to be covering the game on Sunday, doing a live stream. We typically do a live stream the day of play-by-play. So, if people want to check that out, to be doing that. And as far as the Colts schedule looks like, it's a weird thing where, like, yes, the playoffs are still technically in play, but I think this will be a big telling point here. How do you respond after really embarrassing yourselves on prime time? I mean, how do you respond to that? And I think that'll be a long way and kind of very telling, like you said, in the direction of this franchise and where they go. Do they go back to AR? Do they stick with Flacco for the year? And what happens with this franchise moving forward? Is AR a guy that the Colts still believe in, or the Colts could be looking for another quarterback come April? I don't know at this point. I thought that this wouldn't even be a conversation, but here we are. So it's going to be really interesting to see, how does Joe Flacco look? Does he look similar? Is he missing those throws that he typically has made in his career? Is it another repeat performance, or is it more like the Jacksonville game? I'm not sure. But I think that'll be a big telling point. And, man, if I tell you what, if you go out and lay another stinker on offense, you think the fan base was loud this last week? I mean, it's going to be even worse at home. So there's a lot of pressure on this team. I mean, there's a lot of things that this Colts team, there's expectations this team had that they've fallen short of so far. And, so I think this game's going to be a big telling point. Are the Colts in this game? Are they not? I guess we'll see. How does the offense look? How do they respond? If it's more of the same, there are going to be even more questions with this team.
Yeah, 4-6, 3-4 in the conference does put you at a tough. It starts to creep away. And then you're right, there is a lot riding on Joe Flacco. We'll see if he can come up with it. Sean McDermott's generally very good in these settings, but we've seen some lapses at times. And one of our listeners, Ben Johnson, would be great for AR. I'm sure you guys probably agree, but I don't think you're second year in. I don't know if you're in the mindset yet to make that move. You probably go with a different player over a different coach, but not inside the Colts to know how that'll work out. But Cody, thank you so much. Definitely send some people over to the live chat, live viewership that you got going on. Those are always fun. Definitely live reaction. So we really appreciate you coming on. Wish I could say maybe there'd be a playoff rematch. May not look like it, even on a division versus wild card, but you never ever know. Got that soft schedule to end it though, so that's always gonna, for me, think you could mess around with some of these bad teams in the AFC. I really do think that 7 seed always shocks me who takes that every single season, including you guys took it a couple years ago. So Cody, thank you so much for being on. Really appreciate it, and good luck on your live show, man.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that, guys.
Yeah, see you soon, man. So Cody's one of my favorite guests. We don't play the Colts too much lately. It's strange. It's been the first time since 2020, Kevin. But give me your final kind of takeaways from what Cody said, and we'll get our score predictions in here right now shortly.
Small correction: 2021 was the last time we played.
Okay,
because it was 2020 playoffs, right, with Phillip Rivers, and then 21 was when Jonathan Taylor ran for 185 yards and 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, 21. Okay, yep.
And then other than that, did Josh play against them in 2018 or 19?
No, because the 2017 snow game where they clinched the playoffs on that Shady McCoy touchdown run, and then 2020 was the next time they played. I don't believe he did. Did they? Unless they played in 2019. I'm not overly.
I don't remember.
Sure,
I don't think so. I don't remember playing the Colts too much. No. But I mean, do you think
it hasn't been a lot?
You were just saying that they could sneak in as a 7 seed. I mean, could we be potentially predicting a forecast here where the Bills are hosting the Colts, the 2 versus a 7 in the playoffs?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. They don't seem overly encouraged that's the way it'll go, but I just don't think the bottom of this AFC, especially as AFC East, is floundering. Being 4-6 and a loss here is kind of twofold here, to where it may knock them out of really contention. But that end of the schedule is a 3-game stretch where they could win out. They really could. It's not crazy. It's not like even a bad prediction. And if they're in striking distance to be even like 7-8 at that time or something, it's definitely a striking distance to kick a couple 3 AFC wins in a row, to be 10-7. I don't think it's overly crazy, but they would look at their 6th loss if they aren't able to capitalize against the Bills. So, but I don't know. I think this Colts roster is better than some of these teams that we've played and all the other rosters, including Seattle. So I definitely think Seattle without Metcalf, at least. So I definitely think the 7's in play with their schedule, but they do have the Bills, Lions, even the Jets at Jets. At the Jets is kind of their season, in my opinion. If they don't get that, they're out. If they beat the Jets, though, at the Jets, I think they're very much in play for the 7 seed. So next game that they play after the Bills, that is a game to see if they're actually in. If they don't win that, maybe that's a donezo situation. If they do win that, they're very much there for the 7 seed, in my opinion, with that schedule.
And just for some further clarification, I completely forgot about the 2018 game because it was so ugly. I put it in the rearview mirror, and apparently I never thought about it again. But the Bills lost in Indianapolis 37-5.
Okay. Was Josh playing that, or was it like Barkley?
I think it was Derek Anderson, because it was
Anderson.
October
Yeah, it was Anderson. Yeah,
that was right after Josh got hurt in Houston, right?
Yeah. So there's not, because if you look at his career splits, you don't see too much with Indianapolis on Josh's career splits. He's 0-1 against the Colts. So in the regular season, at least.
And then the playoff game too.
Yeah, right. But in the regular season, let me make sure that's the only other, beside Philly, that's the only other regular season game he hasn't won. Just to be clear. So that's interesting.
So looking at that box score, Derek Anderson was 20 of 31 for 175 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Do you know who the leading rusher was that game for the Bills?
2018? Oh, probably one of those bad backup running backs that they had on those rosters, I'm going to assume. it was like one of those bad Carolina backups or something.
Close. Chris Ivory.
Okay. Yeah. That's about what I was thinking. One of those type of guys. I was thinking like,
so Chris Ivory had
thing.
16 carries for 81 yards. Marcus Murphy was second with 4 carries, 53 yards. Shady McCoy had 1 yard on 2 carries.
I got hurt or something. That's weird.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyways,
got a lot out of Cody's always got a wealth of knowledge. He's been there a while. They do a really great live. They have a lot of followers. They do a really good live stream over there on their BTJ channel. I've been on there when they're playing the Bills. Once again, we haven't played them at all, so there hasn't been a total reason to check them out. But it must have been the last time I was over there was probably around that 2020-2021 season. But they definitely run a really cool live chat. And they're really active over there. So if you're checking out and bored and it's a blowout for the Bills, go over there and see what they're saying. Or if it's a really close game, go over there and see what they're saying. They definitely seem passionate right now with what's going on at Indy and the decisions they're making. So don't play much.
That being said, don't forget, smash the like for us. Make sure to subscribe to Built in Buffalo and just continue to support our channel and our page here. We're going to cut up some long forms tonight and try to get something out tomorrow. And, we've been cutting up our game plans and our score predictions. So that being said, what is your game plan for this game, Kevin?
Cody really broke it down really well for us. They've struggled against the run. DVOA doesn't back that up, but Cody's inside and knows what's going on. They're okay against the run, but if their linebackers can't cover, the Bills are going to anticipate that short passing game again. The Miami Dolphins game plan of running and short passing. Bills are going to take that. If they're going to try to bring people up, then that's maybe where you see it open up. But Amari Cooper is going to definitely open up the game a little bit with Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid. Matt Collins is going to do his blocking thing. I guess, we're not going to see Keon Coleman, which is too bad because I thought he had a winnable matchup in his performance. So that's too bad indoors. Where Josh, can you believe those stats? 7-0 indoors, 7-0 inside a dome. That is. There's some retractable roof stats that they put separately, which is strange, but in a true dome, he's 7-0 and has much better statistics. It's pretty staggering how much better Josh plays when he knows the environment's good. He doesn't have a wet, slippery glove and things are going right. So, I think that you're going to see the best of Josh Allen in this game. And he's going to take that short passing game. And I asked Cody straight up, I asked him, he heard me, is a linebacking play good enough to stop a pretty solid Bills short passing game right now? I didn't get a confident answer that it could. So, that is my Bills offensive game plan in the defense. I want to Seattle on the defensive side now. I want a Seattle game plan, sell out to stop Jonathan Taylor. If Joe Flacco is going to stand back there and rip you apart with a hurt Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce, where the Bills traditionally play really well against deep threats, that's not an over concern unless they're selling out against the run and he gets by. But really that Tyreek Hill versus backup Kyrie Elam style of 30 to 40 yard play is like the maximum play. And that's one of the best receivers on our backup fourth cornerback. That's about the ceiling of worry that I have. But ultimately you got to sell out, stop the run, get it going, make it look like Kenneth Walker. I heard all the time how Kenneth Walker was going to run down the Bills' throats. They're struggling to run the ball a little bit. They've gone away from it at times. It reminds me of the Seattle game a lot. And you could argue Seattle's better in some places, maybe Indy's better in others. But ultimately make Joe Flacco beat you. You can't have Jonathan Taylor beat you. That's unacceptable. Run stop game. Don't do the bend, don't break like you're playing a good quarterback game like a Tua or a Mahomes. You want to do the run stop game, run the ball, short passes. I do believe that Cody's score prediction is probably right, but that's my keys and how you would craft the W.
Well, branching off of that, I'll start with the defense. Really, for defense and offense, I think it comes down to winning up front, but I'll start with the defense because the Bills barely got any pressure on Tua this past week. And I know that Tua is different, specifically in that Dolphins offense, just because he gets it out so quickly. It's just, you drop back, boom, you find your first target, first read, maybe second read, and then you go with it. So, yeah, the Bills' numbers probably didn't look that good, but either way, you got to be able to generate some type of pressure because this is Joe Flacco. He's almost 40 years old, and this isn't a Mike McDaniel offense. So if you can get pressure on Joe Flacco and just win up front in general, whether it's the passing game or the run game, I think that will bode well. It should be a big boost if they can get Christian Benford back. And then with the rest of the pieces as well. Do you think that Jordan Phillips or Quentin Jefferson will play on Sunday, or is it a little bit too early?
Not much, maybe under 10 snaps.
I mean, I think one of them will at least get a jersey, right? Because they got
One of them will get a jersey. One of them get a jersey. Yep. I can't say who. I would have no idea. I would think Jefferson, but you could give it to Phillips knowing that he knows the defense. But at most, single-digit snaps, though.
Yeah, so regardless of who plays, just generate pressure and win up front. That being said, for the offense, I think you can win up front with the running game because I think Ray Davis is special, man. Like, he is a weapon, and he showed it in the passing game this past Sunday with that 63-yard touchdown reception, which was the longest touchdown reception by a Bills running back since 2012 with C.J. Spiller. So I think that you just need to feed Ray Davis, specifically in a game like this, when you have a Colts team that is second to last. So they rank 31st in run defense, giving up 150 yards per game. Now, you could make a case and say that maybe their secondary is a little bit weak. They're giving up 383 total yards of offense. So that's fourth worst. So either way, the defense by those numbers really hasn't been, playing that well by any means. But I think that you can really exploit them again by winning up front, get James Cook involved, get Ray Davis involved, and then that should open up more things for the passing game. One last thing I'll say, going back to the defense real quick, along the same lines of generating pressure, it's a very young offensive line. So if the Bills can use their experience to their advantage, I think that'll be key as well.
It looks like one of their stud tackles will be back. He's coming back off a concussion. I would expect him to play. I don't see them playing three rookies on the offensive line. Very good. They've addressed offensive line pretty exclusively. They've done really well at offensive line for maybe some of the other issues that Cody was mentioning. Their offensive line always seems to have depth and always seems to be decent. This year they got a little bit, but if you get the injury bug between Kelly and Fries, kind of hurts a little bit when those are your two starters. But there's definitely some areas where the Bills can exploit on that offensive line and definitely at least get in there and run blitzes and make them throw the ball with Joe Flacco and have a really good package for Josh Downs. And ultimately, Bernard's gonna have his say with Taron Johnson to help take away that middle of the field. So that's going to be great as the Bills push to have Matt Milano back shortly. Real quickly, though, Kevin, we got to get out of here. Hour and 45 minutes. We really appreciate everybody being in here with us. Cody was a great guest. Talked about roster development earlier in the show. To our show sponsors, the Summit Center and Larson-Timko Funeral Home. Kevin, give me your final score prediction.
I agree with Cody's assessment, thinking that Indy is just not going to be that good of a team for the rest of the season. I think that there's a lot of turmoil there with the quarterback position, but I also agree with your take, and I think that they could seriously sneak into the back spot of the wild card here, whether it's the 6th or the 7th seed, because I think the season is far from over. And you made the point as well that the Bills always have that stupid game in November that they somehow drop, where it's just like, how did they come out flat against this team? So I will say, I think the Bills are going to win, but I think the Colts are going to shock a lot of us, and they're going to keep it really close. And it could be a game like we saw this past Sunday against Miami. And I think maybe it comes down to a Tyler Bass field goal again, which, by the way, we didn't mention him tonight, but so happy for him. He needed that in the worst way. Hopefully that's a confidence boost moving forward. But I have Buffalo winning 27-24 to improve to 8-2. And then bring on the Kansas City Chiefs.
You do got the one-score game action. I did have it last week. I did feel like we would get the best of the Dolphins. And Cody's right. They're in a weird situation right now to where it could be a Bills blowout. The offense isn't right. Made some bad moves going away from AR. Fans aren't happy. Offense isn't happy. They're in a weird spot. And there's definitely writing on the wall for that. But also at the same time, there's writing on the wall for, like, let's prove this is the right move. Our season's on the line again. At least this talented roster, in my opinion, a pretty talented roster, can make a big splash. And this is what I was trying to, go down with Cody, is that, like, a Denver loss in Kansas City and, like, the Bengals playing the Ravens tomorrow, like, and if the Colts upset the Bills, they're in the playoffs. So that's not crazy stuff to happen. So if, especially, like, the 7's there for them. And we'll find out this weekend if the team's good enough or if the Bills do get it done as they're supposed to get it done. The line's obnoxiously low for me. It's kind of makes me feel weird. The Bills should be favored by 7-10, but 4 right now is telling me that, like, I think they're going to go all out and get this thing done. I agree with the line. I think it's going to be another one-score game. The Bills have played some blowouts in past weeks. Then they got on the one-score game train. And once again, I do agree Josh Allen's going to play well indoors. And they're going to try to figure out. I got 30-23 in this specific game. And I really think that ultimately it will be close. Maybe the Bills are ahead for most of it or at a stretch where it doesn't feel that close. But Indy's good enough, especially if the Bills are up at any point and kind of go to bed like they can do at some points. But the Bills are really good in the third quarter. That's what always shocks me, how good the Bills are in the third quarter. They're great. And sometimes in the fourth quarter hasn't been as great as I'd anticipate, but the third quarter has been awesome. And obviously we know about the slow starts. So if the Bills get off to a fast start with how good they play in the third quarter, it's a blowout or usually double digits, or almost a blowout. If they get off the slow starts, that's when you see 1-score games, except for that Titans game. But that Titans team was awful. But that's going to do it for us on the Going Deep Buffalo show. To our show sponsors, to everybody tuning in for an hour and 45 minutes. We really appreciate everybody being here. That's all I got. We'll be back at you next week to talk about the Chiefs with one of my favorite Chiefs guests as well for an early season battle for seeding purposes. The Bills have to get through the Colts first to make that more competitive. If they don't get through the Colts, that Chiefs game becomes randomly not that crazy busy, being 3 games back. And then let's say something happens where you lose the Chiefs game. Now you're not even competitive with the Chiefs. So they need to get through the Colts first before that game even is somewhat relevant, as the Chiefs keep winning 1-score games in crazy fashions, no matter how they do it in overtime, in 1-score games with no toe, with a toe, with penalties. At some point, they're going to just have too much of a lead for even the Bills, Ravens, or Texans, or whoever else to catch them. So the Bills need to keep pace and beat them. Hope for some luck with a good Denver defense. But if not, there's still a game and a half plus back as the Bills approach their bye here shortly. Kevin, we'll be back at it next Wednesday. Really appreciate everybody being here. We'll catch you next week.
Go Bills.